Sound of a luxury SUV engine humming, then cutting out abruptly. Narrator, VO. The tire tracks she carved into my land were a declaration of war. She thought her money and her lawyer gave her the right to take whatever she wanted. She thought I was just some dumb farmer she could roll over, sound of a shovel scraping against a concrete floor. Narrator, VO. She was about to learn that on a farm, we have a very special way of dealing with unwelcome guests. The piece of the valley was the first thing Jedediah Jed Stone had ever truly owned. It wasn't on a deed, and it couldn't be appraised, but it was more valuable than the 300 acres of rolling pasture and dense woodland that had been in his family for 5 generations. It was in the low morning mist that clung to the hollows, the sharp scent of hay baking in the afternoon sun, and the weary, bone-deep satisfaction of falling into bed after a day of honest labor. This piece was a fragile thing, a glass heirloom. He polished with every sunrise, and for the past 6 months, he'd watched a wrecking ball swing at it. The old Miller place, which bordered the eastern edge of his hayfield, had been sold. The quaint, if slightly dilapidated 2-story farmhouse was bulldozed in a single afternoon. In its place, a monument to modern excess began to rise. It was a house of sharp angles, glass walls, and a footprint so large it seemed to be actively shoving the surrounding nature out of its way. With the house came the noise, the incessant beeping of trucks, the whine of saws, the shouted conversations of men who didn't know the land well enough to speak to it in a whisper. Jed had tolerated it. Progress, his father used to say with a grimace, was a train you either got on or got under. Jed had no intention of doing either. He just wanted the train to stay on its own damn track. The new owner was a woman from the city, someone who had likely paid more for the land than Jed's family had earned from it in a century. He'd seen her a few times, a whirlwind of tailored clothing and sharp-edged sunglasses, directing the construction crews with the imperious wave of a diamond-laden hand. Their first and only interaction had been a curt nod across the property line, an exchange so devoid of warmth it felt like a warning. The day the war began started like any other. Jed was up before the sun, the familiar ache in his lower back a testament to a lifetime of mending fences and hauling feed. After milking the cows and setting them out to pasture, he drove his rust-pocked but reliable pickup toward the far hayfield to check on the irrigation lines. As he crested the small hill that overlooked the the new place, he slammed on the brakes. There, sitting 20 feet inside his property line, was a gleaming black SUV. It was one of those monstrous vehicles that looked more like an armored transport than a family car, with tires that could swallow a small animal. It was parked carelessly, one wheel crushing a patch of wild clover he'd always liked, its metallic sheen an obscene violation against the rustic green of the field. Jed stared, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The construction site. Next door was a maelstrom of mud and machinery. He could see why someone wouldn't want to park there, but that wasn't his problem. The property line was clearly marked by a row of ancient, gnarled oak trees, a line respected for generations. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. He was a patient man. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when his gut told him not to. He parked his truck, walked over to the offending vehicle, and took a long, slow breath. He could go over there, raise hell, and start a feud that could last for years. Or he could be a neighbor. He chose the latter. He tore a page from the small notebook he kept in his glove compartment and scrawled a simple, polite message. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Just a heads up, this is private property, part of my working hayfield. Would appreciate it if you could. Park on your own land going forward. Thanks, Jed Stone." He tucked the note securely under the driver's side windshield wiper and went about his day, the image of the SUV a persistent stone in his shoe. The next morning, it was back. Same spot. The note was gone, but a small brown smudge on the ground nearby looked suspiciously like a crumpled piece of paper that had been tossed from the window. The patience began to fray. Jed changed his routine. He finished his morning chores and then drove out to the field, parking his truck 50 yards away, just out of sight behind a copse of birch trees. He sat, sipping lukewarm coffee from his thermos, and waited. An hour later, the woman emerged from the architectural marvel next door. She was dressed in expensive-looking athletic wear that had likely never seen a bead of sweat. Talking loudly into her phone, she strode directly to the SUV, her steps purposeful and completely devoid of hesitation. He got out of his truck and walked towards her, keeping his pace steady and non-threatening. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called, out when he was 20 feet away. She stopped, held up a single, perfectly manicured finger to silence him, and continued her conversation. "No. Tell him the Carrara marble is non-negotiable. If he can't source it, he's fired. I don't care what it costs." She snapped the phone shut and turned to Jed, her expression a mixture of annoyance and boredom. Her sunglasses were so dark he couldn't see her eyes, but he felt their judgment. "Yes? I'm Jed Stone, your neighbor." He gestured vaguely toward his farm. "I left a note on your car yesterday." The note. She said the words as if recalling a mildly unpleasant odor. "Right. I saw it." "And you still parked here," Jed said, his voice level. "My driveway is a pit of mud and nails, and I'm not having my contractors track that filth into my house. This," she said, waving a dismissive hand at the field around them, "is convenient. It's just a patch of grass. It's not hurting anything." The casual arrogance of it stunned him. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's not just a patch of grass. It's my hay field. The tires compact the soil, which ruins the yield. That's my livestock's winter feed you're parked on." She actually laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. A few tire tracks aren't going to bankrupt you. Look, I'll be out of your hair once the driveway is paved. A few more weeks. You can survive." She turned to open her car door. "That's not the point," Jed said, his voice harder now. "The point is, this is my land. The line is right there." He pointed to the row of oaks. "It's a simple matter of respect." She paused, turning back to him. She slid her sunglasses down her nose, revealing eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. "Respect is a two-way street. If you respected the fact that I'm improving the neighborhood and raising your property values, you wouldn't be bothering me over a parking spot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a call with my designer in Milan." She got into the SUV, the engine purring to life with a low growl, and drove off, leaving Jed standing in the silence, the smell of exhaust fumes tainting the clean country air. The next phase of the war was one-sided. Jed hammered a wooden stake into the ground where she parked and affixed a professionally printed "private property, no parking" sign to it. The next morning, the sign was gone. Not just pulled up, but gone entirely. And the SUV was back. Jed's jaw was a permanent knot of tension. This woman wasn't just inconsiderate, she was malicious. She wasn't just parking, she was making a statement. That weekend, he spent 3 hours sinking 2 thick cedar posts deep into the earth on either side of her preferred parking area. He drilled holes, fed a length of thick quarter-inch steel cable through them, and secured it with heavy-duty clamps. It was a clear, unyielding boundary 3 feet off the ground. Let her deal with that. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It was overkill, sure, but she had forced his hand. He had re-established order. On Monday morning, he woke with a sense of unease. He skipped his coffee and drove straight to the field. His heart sank. The cable was gone. Not cut, but unbolted. The clamps had been expertly loosened and removed, the cable coiled neatly and left on the ground. And the black SUV sat in its usual spot, looking more smug and triumphant than ever. She must have sent one of her workmen to do it. The calculated effort, the sheer audacity of it, sent a white-hot spike of rage through him. The peace of the valley was gone, replaced by the thrumming of his own angry pulse. He stormed back to his truck and drove to his barn, his mind a whirlwind. He had to confront her. This had to end, today. He parked by his house and practically ran across the property line, ignoring the mud and debris of the construction site. He saw her near the front door, directing a painter. "You!" he yelled. His voice raw. She turned, a flicker of something annoyance, victory, in her cold eyes. "Can I help you?" "My cable. You sent someone to take down my cable." "It was a safety hazard," she said coolly, crossing her arms. "And an eyesore. You can't just erect barricades wherever you feel like it. There are bylaws, you know." "On my own property? Are you insane? You have been trespassing, ignoring every polite request, destroying my property, and you have the nerve to talk to me about bylaws?" "I'm not trespassing," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm utilizing an unused tract of land for temporary access. A judge would see it as a minor squabble initiated by a hostile and unreasonable neighbor." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And trust me, my lawyers are much, much better than yours." That was it. The threat. The casual, cruel reminder of the power imbalance between them. She saw him know. The rage that had flooded Jed's senses on Clarissa's muddy lawn didn't burn out. Instead, it cooled, hardening into something dense and heavy in his gut. Purpose. For the rest of the day, he went about his chores with a mechanical precision. He repaired a fence post, rotated the herd, and cleared a fallen branch from the access road. To any observer, he was the picture of a stoic farmer at work, but inside, a meticulous plan was being laid, each step as carefully considered as planting rows of corn. He waited until the last sliver of the sun had bled from the horizon, leaving the valley steeped in the deep indigo of twilight. The lights of Clarissa's glass palace blazed, an arrogant gash in the darkness, but the construction site was quiet. He ate a silent dinner, the food tasteless in his mouth, his thoughts focused on the task ahead. When the clock on the wall struck 10, he knew it was time. The lights in her house had been off for an hour. He pulled on his heaviest work boots and walked to the barn. The air inside was warm and thick with the familiar earthy smell of hay and livestock. The Holsteins shifted in their stalls, their large, placid eyes reflecting the dim safety lights. He moved among them, his hands running over their strong backs, murmuring softly. They were the heart of this farm. They were what she had insulted with her casual cruelty. They, he thought with a grim smile, would be the instruments of his reply. At the far end of the barn, parked next to the baler, was the manure spreader. It was a rugged, unglamorous piece of machinery, a wheeled iron tub with a PTO-driven chain that fed its contents to a pair of spinning discs at the rear. Its purpose was to return to the earth what the cows had taken from it, to enrich the soil, to foster new growth. Tonight, it would serve a different kind of renewal. He hooked the spreader to the hitch of his John Deere, the heavy clank of steel echoing in the quiet barn. Then he started the real work. With a wide shovel, he began to fill the hopper. This wasn't the dry, composted manure he used for top dressing. This was the fresh stuff from the collection pit, a wet, heavy, pungent slurry of digested grass and grain. It was the organic essence of his farm. Each shovelful was a meditation. My lawyers are much, much better than yours. The shovel scraped against the concrete floor. You poor, simple man, he grunted, heaving another heavy load over the side. Get off my property before I call the sheriff. The irony was so thick he could almost taste it. He worked for over an hour, the rhythmic scrape and lift a physical manifestation of his simmering fury. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mingling with the grime. The spreader was a machine of utility, Not precision, it was designed for wide broadcast dispersal. To achieve his goal, he needed to get close, very close. The thought of maneuvering the wide, clunky tractor in the dark, right next to her six-figure monument to vanity, sent a tremor of nervous energy through him. But it was overshadowed by a cold, thrilling resolve. When the spreader was nearly full, a 2-ton payload of righteous indignation, he climbed into the tractor's cab. The diesel engine turned over with a familiar guttural roar before settling into a low rumble. He kept the lights off, navigating by the pale moonlight filtering through the barn doors. He knew this land like the back of his own calloused hand. He could have driven it blindfolded. He rumbled out of the barn and down the dirt track that led toward the eastern hayfield. The tractor's massive tires chewed at the earth. As he approached the property line, he saw it. The black SUV, a hulking shadow parked in its usual spot, a monument to its owner's unyielding arrogance. It was so pristine, so aggressively out of place, it looked like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong world. He slowed the tractor to a crawl, the engine noise seeming to cannon through the silent night. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. No more notes, no more words, just consequences. He maneuvered the tractor and the spreader alongside the SUV, the passenger side of the vehicle now less than 5 feet from the spreader's dispersal discs. The positioning had to be perfect. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand hovering over the lever that engaged the power takeoff shaft. He gave one last look at the glass house, dark and silent. He thought of her threat, her sneer, her complete and utter disrespect. Jed engaged the PTO. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. With a loud whir that escalated into a mechanical shriek, the spinners at the back of the spreader exploded into motion. A thick, wet, semi-liquid torrent of cow manure erupted from the machine in a wide, powerful arc. It wasn't a gentle dusting. It was a deluge. The sound of the slurry hitting the SUV was a series of wet, percussive impacts, like 100 rotten melons being thrown against a wall. Splat, thump, splat, splat, splat. It coated the gleaming passenger side doors, the windows, the roof. Jed angled the tractor slightly, and the foul payload rained down upon the hood and windshield. He could see it, even in the dim light. A thick, lumpy brown blanket that clung to every surface, dripping in viscous streams from the door handles, and side mirrors filling every seam and crevice. The air, already pungent, became an overwhelming miasma. It was the smell of pure, unadulterated farm life, delivered with malicious intent. He let the spreader run for a full 30 seconds, emptying a quarter of its load onto and around the vehicle, creating a soupy, treacherous moat in the grass. Then, with the same deliberate calm he'd felt all night, he disengaged the PTO. The shrieking whir died down, leaving only the rumble of the tractor's engine and the gentle, dripping sound of justice. He didn't linger to admire his work. He put the tractor in gear and drove away, not looking back. He returned to the barn, parked the tractor and spreader in their place, and spent another 20 minutes meticulously hosing down the equipment. A farmer keeps his tools clean. When he was done, he walked back to his house, the foul smell clinging to his clothes and boots. He stripped on the porch, leaving the soiled items in a pile, and went inside to take the hottest shower of his life. Sleep was impossible. He made a pot of coffee and sat in the dark kitchen, watching the window that faced east, waiting for the dawn. He felt no guilt, no remorse. He felt only a profound and unsettling calm. He had absorbed her aggression, her contempt, and had simply reflected it back at her in a language she could not ignore. The first hint of gray appeared on the horizon. Then came the pale pinks and oranges, spilling across the sky, slowly illuminating the valley. And then the scene was revealed. The black SUV was no longer black. It was a grotesque brown monstrosity, steaming gently in the cool morning air. It looked as if it had been dredged from the bottom of a septic tank. Right on schedule at 7:15 a.m., the front door of the glass house opened. Clarissa emerged, dressed in the same immaculate white athletic gear, holding a large mug. She took a deep breath of the morning air, and her face instantly contorted in disgust. Her eyes scanned the area, trying to locate the source of the overwhelming stench, and then she saw it. She stopped dead. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on her stone patio. For a full 5 seconds, she was utterly still, a statue of disbelief. Jed, watching from his window, allowed himself a small, tight smile. The stillness was shattered by a sound that echoed across the valley, a scream of such pure, primal rage and horror that the birds in the nearby oaks took flight. No! She sprinted from her patio, not even seeming to notice the treacherous, soupy ground until her expensive white sneakers sank into it. What is this? Her head whipped around, her eyes wild, and they locked onto Jed's farmhouse. He had moved to his front porch, a steaming mug of his own coffee in hand, and was leaning against a support beam, watching her. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger, her face a mask of purple fury. "You did this! You filthy, disgusting animal!" She started stomping toward him, her feet making sucking sounds with each step. "I'm going to ruin you! I'm going to sue you for everything you have! You've destroyed my car!" Jed took a slow sip of his coffee. He let her get to the edge of her property line before he spoke, his voice calm and even, easily carrying across the morning air. "Morning, neighbor," he said pleasantly. "Bit of a mess over there." "A mess?" she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You maniac! You buried my car in manure," Jed supplied helpfully. "Best fertilizer there is. I was just giving the topsoil a feed. It's a messy job. You really should be more careful where you park. That's private property, you know. Someone could get hurt." The paper-thin, plausible deniability was like gasoline on a bonfire. She looked from the manure-caked SUV to his calm face and seemed to have a complete breakdown. "I'm calling." "The police!" she howled, fumbling for the phone in her pocket. "Vandalism! Destruction of property! You are going to jail!" "You do that," Jed said, taking another sip. "I'm sure Sheriff Miller will be very interested to hear your story. You can start by explaining what your vehicle was doing on my land after multiple requests to move it. Trespassing is the word, I believe. Then you can explain how it got in the way of my regularly scheduled agricultural activities." She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The sheer, unassailable logic of his position seemed to short-circuit her rage. He wasn't a vandal. He was a farmer, doing farm work, on his own farm. But her fury quickly found its voice again. "We'll see about that," she snarled, finally dialing her phone. Jed simply watched. Sheriff Miller, a man whose face was a roadmap of long days and small-town troubles, didn't look at Clarissa. He looked at the SUV. He walked a slow circle around it, his boots squishing in the fertilized mud, his expression carefully neutral. He squinted at the thick brown paste caked onto the windows and noted the small bits of undigested corn and hay embedded in it, like profane sprinkles on a dark chocolate frosting. "That's thorough," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. He turned to Clarissa, who was vibrating with an energy so intense Jed thought she might actually ignite. "Thorough!" she screeched. "He assaulted my property. It's a $100,000 vehicle. I want him arrested. I want to press charges for vandalism, destruction of property, everything." Miller took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of his hand, a gesture Jed had seen him use 1,000 times when faced with a situation he'd rather be a million miles away from. "Ma'am," the sheriff began, his voice calm and measured. "Let me get this straight. You've been parking your vehicle here, on Mr. Stone's property?" "My driveway is a construction zone. Where else was I supposed to park?" she shot back, as if this were a self-evident justification for breaking the law. "On your own property, perhaps," Miller suggested mildly. He then looked at Jed. Jed, what's your side of this? Jed had remained on his porch, observing. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. Now he spoke, his voice as steady as the oak trees that marked the property line. Morning, Frank. As you know, I fertilize this field twice a year. Schedule got pushed back with the rains last week. I came out this morning before sunrise, like I always do, to get the job done. Saw a vehicle parked in the field. Figured it was abandoned, or maybe one of the construction workers' trucks had broken down. I've got a schedule to keep, a whole field to cover before the sun gets too high. Did my best to work around it. He let the words hang in the air. He didn't embellish. He didn't have to. The simple, unadorned truth of a farmer's routine was his best defense. Miller nodded slowly, processing. He walked over to the spot where Jed's cedar posts had been and noticed the disturbed earth. He saw the 2 pieces of thick rope lying nearby, cleanly severed. Looks like there were some attempts to mark this area off, he observed, looking at Clarissa. That was an illegal barricade. A hazard, she snapped, her voice cracking with frustration. She could feel the narrative she wanted, that of a wronged victim, slipping from her grasp. Ma'am, on his own property, a man can put up a rope if he wants to, Miller said, flatly. Now, what I'm seeing here is a classic civil dispute. It's a messy one, I'll grant you that. He gestured to the car. But a civil one nonetheless. Your vehicle was trespassing. In the course of his regular, established agricultural work, Mr. Stone's equipment made contact with your vehicle. Without any witnesses or admission of intent to cause damage, I don't have a criminal case. I can't arrest a man for doing his chores on his own land. Clarissa's face went from purple to a ghostly white. What? Are you serious? You're his friend. You're protecting him. I'm upholding the law, ma'am, Miller said, his tone hardening. The accusation had stung. And the law is very clear about trespassing. My advice to you is to call your insurance company and a tow truck. Might want to specify they'll need a crew with strong stomachs. As for Mr. Stone, I'd advise you to stay off his property. This is not over, she seethed, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She glared at Jed, a look of pure hatred in her eyes. This is a joke of a town with a joke of a sheriff. You will be hearing from my lawyer. Both of you. She turned, stomped back to her house, ruining her white sneakers beyond any hope of salvation, and slammed the door so hard Jed thought the plate glass might shatter. Sheriff Miller waited until she was gone, then walked over to Jed's porch, shaking his head. Jedediah Stone, he said, the exhaustion clear in his voice. You and I both know you aimed that spreader like a cannon. I was just doing my chores, Frank, Jed repeated, but this time the corner of his mouth twitched. Right, and cows can fly. Miller leaned against the railing, his gaze distant. You stirred up a hornet's nest. That woman, she's the kind that doesn't just want to win. She wants to burn the other guy's life to the ground. Money like that buys influence. Watch yourself. Her lawyers won't be as reasonable as I am. I'll keep that in mind, Jed said. You do that, Miller said, clapping him on the shoulder before turning to leave. And for God's sake, give me a heads up next time you decide to fertilize so close to the property line. For 3 days, a tense peace settled over the valley. A specialized hazmat towing and cleaning crew arrived. The men dressed in white coveralls and respirators, looking like they were handling a toxic waste spill. They spent hours scraping and power washing the SUV before loading it onto a flatbed and hauling it away. Clarissa was nowhere to be seen. Jed felt a cautious sense of victory. The immediate threat was gone. He had reclaimed his land. Then, on the 4th day, the real attack came. It arrived via a courier service, a crisp, thick envelope with the embossed logo of a prestigious city law firm, Blackwood, Finch, and Associates. Jed's hands, accustomed to the rough texture of wood and steel, felt clumsy opening the smooth, heavy paper. Inside was a 5-page letter, dense with legal jargon that was as foreign to him as another language. but the meaning was brutally clear. He was being accused of malicious mischief, intentional destruction of private property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and creating a private nuisance. The letter detailed the damages. There was a bill from the hazmat cleaning company for $4,500. An estimate from a luxury auto body shop for $18,000 to strip, repaint, and replace all exterior seals and plastics due to corrosive organic contamination. But that wasn't the worst of it. They were also claiming $25,000 for the diminished resale value of the vehicle and a further $50,000 for Ms. Clarissa Dubois' severe emotional trauma, anxiety, and public humiliation. The total demand was for $97,500. Jed's blood ran cold. He had to read the number 3 times. It was more than he cleared in 2 years. The letter concluded with a chilling ultimatum. If the full amount was not paid within 10 business days, a lawsuit would be filed. The suit would not only seek the stated damages, but also punitive damages and legal fees, and would place a lien on his assets, pending judgment, including the farm that had been in his family since the Civil War. The satisfaction he had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic taste of fear. This was the weapon she had promised to use. Not a sheriff, but a team of legal assassins in expensive suits. He sank into a kitchen chair, the letter trembling in his hand. The smell of fresh-cut hay from the open window suddenly seemed faint, distant. He could see it all slipping away. The land, the house, the barn, his entire life, everything his father and grandfather had worked and bled for. All because of a parking spot. For a full day, he was paralyzed by dread. He couldn't eat. He went through the motions of his chores, but his mind was trapped, rereading the threatening phrases in the letter. He was a farmer. He knew soil, weather, and livestock. He didn't know how to fight this. That evening, staring at the foreclosure. Notice his grandfather had fought off during the Depression, which he kept framed in the study as a reminder of his family's resilience. He knew he couldn't give up. He couldn't let Clarissa Dubois be the one to succeed where droughts, floods, and banks had failed. There was only one person he could think of. He picked up the phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in years. The next afternoon, Jed sat in a dusty office above the town's hardware store. The lawyer's shingle on the door read simply, David Gideon, attorney at law. Dave wasn't a shark. He was more of a badger, grizzled, underestimated, and known for fighting tenaciously. Once he sank his teeth into something. He was a local boy who'd gone to state school for his law degree and had come back home to handle wills, property disputes, and the occasional DUI. Jed laid the whole story out, from the first polite note to the arrival of the terrifying letter. Dave listened patiently, leaning back in his creaky leather chair, his hands laced behind his head. He read the letter from Blackwood, Finch, and Associates, his expression unreadable. 97.5. Dave whistled softly when he was done. They're not messing around. They want to scare you into rolling over. Can they do it, Dave? Jed asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Can they take my farm? Dave didn't answer right away. He read the letter again, more slowly this time. A faint smile started to play on his lips. He picked up a pencil and tapped it against a specific paragraph. They've made a mistake, Jed, he said, his eyes gleaming with a light Jed hadn't seen in his own for days. A big one. City lawyers. They come in with overwhelming force, thinking they can just flatten you. They write these threatening letters assuming you're an idiot who'll panic and pay. He leaned forward, the creak of his chair filling the small office. They've built their entire case around your alleged malicious intent to damage her property. They're treating this like a simple vandalism case that happened in a vacuum. But it wasn't, Jed insisted. She was on my land. Exactly. Dave slapped the desk with his open palm, making a stack of dusty files jump. And that's the door they've left wide open. Her trespassing isn't just a footnote, Jed. It's the entire foundation of the event. While they're busy, try I. Dave Gideon's response to the legal threat from Blackwood, Finch, and Associates was a masterpiece of rural defiance. Where their letter was a sleek, intimidating serpent of legalese, Dave's was a badger, short, bristly, and armed with sharp teeth they wouldn't see until it was too late. It was 2 pages long, written in plain English, and sent via registered mail. The first paragraph flatly rejected their extortionate and baseless demand for $97,500. The second paragraph laid out the undisputed facts. Ms. Dubois' vehicle was trespassing on private agricultural land after repeated warnings. Both, written and physical, were ignored and deliberately destroyed by their client. The third paragraph was the counterattack. It formally put them on notice of Jedediah Stone's intent to file a countersuit. The claims were listed in simple, damning bullet points: trespass, continuous and willful, destruction of private property, 1 sign, 2 cedar posts, 1 length of steel cable, damages to pasture land via soil compaction, with an attached preliminary, assessment from the County Agricultural Extension Office valuing the restoration cost at $850, harassment and intentional interference with agricultural operations, pursuant to the State Right to Farm Act, per Bow 23 died at A4. The letter concluded not with a threat, but with an invoice. It was for a total of $1,175, itemizing the destroyed materials, Jed's labor for installation and removal, and the pasture land damages. "We expect payment within 30 days to consider this matter resolved," Dave had written, a line of such audacious confidence it made Jed laugh out loud for the first time in a week. The effect was immediate. The lawyers from Blackwood, Finch, and Associates, who had likely expected a terrified phone call or a check, were instead met with an invoice and a threat of a lawsuit they probably had to Google. The next communication was different. The arrogance was replaced by a cold procedural formality. The legal machinery had been engaged. The next step was depositions. They met in a sterile, soulless conference room in a city an hour away. It was neutral territory, but it felt like Jed was on another planet. The air smelled of expensive cleaning products and ambition. Jed wore his best dark blue work shirt and clean jeans, feeling as out of place as a bale of hay in a modern art museum. Dave, in his slightly rumpled but serviceable suit, looked completely unfazed. Clarissa arrived with a man who could only be Mr. Finch. He was tall and silver-haired, with a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it was sewn onto him. Clarissa herself wore a razor-sharp, dark gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked at Jed with an expression of such profound loathing it was practically a physical force. She didn't see a man. She saw an insect, she was, determined to crush. Finch began the deposition of Jed. His voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with condescension. "Mr. Stone," he began, steepling his fingers, "could you please describe the financial state of your farm for the record? Would it be fair to characterize it as struggling?" "We get by," Jed said simply, as Dave had coached him. "Just the facts. No emotion. And this fertilization process," Finch continued, saying the word as if it were something vile. "Is it standard practice to launch tons of raw sewage into the air in the dead of night?" "It was early morning, not the dead of night," Jed corrected calmly. "And it's not sewage, it's manure. It's how we return nutrients to the soil. We've done it that way on that field twice a year for over 100 years. And you expect this panel to believe that in the darkness, you were completely unaware that you were burying a brand new $100,000 luxury vehicle?" Jed met his gaze. "I saw an obstacle on my property where it shouldn't have been. I'm operating a 2-ton tractor with a 2-ton spreader attached. It's not a race car. You can't just swerve. I did my best to continue my work," Finch sneered. "Your work? Tell me, Mr. Stone, did you feel a sense of satisfaction as you destroyed my client's property?" "Objection," Dave said, his voice quiet but firm. "Speculation. Asks for an emotional state. Stick to the facts, counselor. Finch's eyes flashed with annoyance, but he moved on. For an hour, he poked and prodded, trying to paint Jed as a vengeful, simple-minded hick who flew into a destructive rage. But the story never changed. It was always the same, simple, unshakable truth. She trespassed, he farmed. Then it was Dave's turn to question Clarissa. He shuffled his folksy, disorganized-looking papers, and Clarissa smirked at Finch. She wasn't worried. "Ms. Dubois," Dave began, his voice friendly. "Nice to meet you. Just a few quick questions. When you bought the old Miller place, were you provided with a plot survey showing the legal property lines?" "Of course," she said, her tone clipped. "And that survey showed the oak trees as the boundary between your land and Mr. Stone's?" "I assume so. I don't memorize these things, but you were aware there was a boundary, and yet you parked on the other side of it. Is that correct?" "My driveway was inaccessible," she snapped. "It was a matter of convenience." "Convenience," Dave repeated, writing the word down slowly. "And when Mr. Stone left you, a polite handwritten note, what did you do with it?" "I threw it away. It was litter." "And when he put up a sign that read private property, what happened to that sign, ma'am?" Finch shifted in his seat. "My client is not on trial for littering, Mr. Gideon." "Just establishing a pattern of behavior," Dave said, cheerfully. He looked back at Clarissa. "The sign, Ms. Dubois." Her jaw tightened. "I removed it. It was an eyesore. And the rope barrier, supported by 2 thick cedar posts. Did you find that to be an eyesore as well?" "It was a dangerous obstruction. I had it removed," she said, her voice rising. Dave nodded, making another note. "So, to be clear, you repeatedly crossed a known property line. You ignored a written request to stop. You destroyed a sign forbidding your actions. And you dismantled a physical barrier erected to prevent those actions. And after all that, you parked your vehicle there again. Is that an accurate summary?" Clarissa looked at Finch, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. But it was too late. She had walked right into it. It was just a patch of grass." "A patch of grass you were obsessed with," Dave said, his tone shifting from friendly to surgical. "Finally, Ms. Dubois, are you aware of the state's Right to Farm Act?" "The what?" she asked, genuinely confused. "It's a law," Dave explained, "that protects farmers like my client from nuisance lawsuits brought by new residents who are unfamiliar with the, shall we say, sights, sounds, and smells associated with normal agricultural operations. Operations like, for example, fertilizing a field. The very law designed to prevent people like you from harassing people like him. Do you see the irony? Here, Ms. Dubois. You're suing him for being a farmer when the law explicitly says you can't." The color drained from Clarissa's face. Finch's condescending smirk had vanished. The simple vandalism case had just become a tangled mess of property rights and agricultural law that would play very poorly in a rural county courthouse. The deposition ended shortly after. Clarissa, however, was not a person who accepted defeat. If the law was going to be an obstacle, she would find another way. She was, as Sheriff Miller had noted, vindictive. A week later, the second wave of the assault began. A white government vehicle pulled up Jed's driveway. It was from the Department of Agriculture, there to investigate an anonymous tip about improper animal welfare standards. The inspector was professional but thorough, checking his herd, his feed storage, and his milking parlor. Jed passed, but the 3-hour inspection cost him half a day of work and left him rattled. 2 days after that, another white vehicle arrived. This time, it was the Environmental Protection Agency. The anonymous tip was about improper manure, management, and potential contamination of the groundwater. This was more serious. The inspector, a stern-faced woman named Agent Davies, walked the property with a clipboard, her eyes missing nothing. She took water samples from his well and Soil samples from near the manure collection pit. The assault was relentless. Code enforcement showed up to question the structural integrity of a 100-year-old hayloft, citing an anonymous complaint. Jed felt besieged, fighting a multi-front war against an enemy he couldn't see, an enemy who used the government itself as a weapon. The legal fees from Dave were mounting but manageable. The potential fines from the EPA, however, could be catastrophic. Clarissa didn't have to beat him in court if she could bankrupt him with 1,000 bureaucratic cuts first. The hope he'd felt in Dave's office began to fade, replaced by the familiar cold dread. It was during the EPA inspector's follow-up visit that everything changed. Agent Davies was discussing potential mitigation requirements for runoff from his feedlot, pointing toward the eastern hayfield. For instance, Mr. Stone, any drainage from your operations has to be controlled. You see that gully over there near your property line? If your runoff were to enter that... She trailed off, her eyes narrowing. Jed followed her gaze. They were looking right at the scene of the original crime. The grass was starting to recover, but the area still bore the marks of the conflict. Agent Davies walked briskly toward the property line, her focus no longer on Jed's farm. She stopped right at the edge, looking down into the shallow gully that separated Jed's field from the newly landscaped perfection of Clarissa's property. "That's odd," she murmured, crouching down. "What is it?" Jed asked, walking over to join her. She pointed at... The arrival of the second EPA vehicle was different. The first one had been a standard-issue sedan. This one was a heavy-duty truck with a laboratory in the back, and it was followed by a drill rig. Agent Davies was no longer alone. She was accompanied by a team of geological surveyors. The focus of the federal government had pivoted with the jarring finality of a breaking bone. Jed watched from his kitchen window as the team, clad in bright orange vests, bypassed his property entirely. They marched onto Clarissa's immaculate, emerald green lawn, their equipment leaving deep tracks in the perfect turf she had paid a fortune to install. Clarissa burst from her house, a figure of pure fury. Her lawyer, already on speakerphone, held out like a talisman. Jed was too far away to hear the words, but he could see the scene unfold like a silent movie. He saw her imperious gestures, the stabbing finger, the dismissive waves. He saw the EPA team leader listen patiently, unmoved, before handing her a warrant. He watched her face crumble as she read it, the realization dawning that her money and her high-powered lawyer were like a paper shield against a battering ram. The power dynamic of the entire valley had just been fundamentally rewritten. The next day, a small section of her lawn was cordoned off with yellow tape that read, EPA Investigation Site. The drill rig bored deep into the earth, pulling up core samples that were meticulously bagged and labeled. The phone call from Dave Gideon came that afternoon. "Jed," he said, and for the first time, Dave's voice contained a note of genuine awe. "You're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with Mr. Finch. He sounded like he'd been run over by a truck." "What did he want?" Jed asked, watching as an excavator began to carefully scrape away the top layer of Clarissa's sod. "He wanted to make a deal," Dave said with a dry chuckle. Apparently, the preliminary soil analysis came back. The contractor she hired to build her palace cut some major corners. We're talking buried drums of industrial solvent, hydraulic fluid, and filled dirt contaminated with asbestos from another demolition site. The EPA is estimating the cleanup costs will be in the seven-figure range, not to mention the fines. She's facing a federal nightmare. Jed was silent, processing the scale of the disaster. Suddenly, Dave continued, his voice dripping, with satisfaction, Mr. Finch's client is no longer concerned with the emotional trauma of some cow manure. Her only concern is making all other legal troubles disappear so she can focus on not being indicted for violating the Clean Water Act. "So what's the deal?" Jed asked. "It's not a deal, Jed. It's an unconditional surrender," Dave said. "Here are our terms, and they are non-negotiable. 1. Her lawsuit against you is dropped with prejudice. It's gone forever. 2. She pays your countersuit and every penny you've paid me in legal fees. 3. She signs a permanent injunction, a restraining order essentially, forbidding her from ever setting foot on your property, parking on it, or communicating with you in any way. Any violation comes with a $50,000 penalty, payable directly to you. Jed looked out the window. The excavator was now digging a massive pit in the center of her lawn. The beautiful house, once a symbol of her power, now looked like it was perched on the edge of a wound. "Tell him I accept," Jed said quietly. The war was over. Jed had won. The aftermath was a slow, grinding spectacle of karmic justice. Clarissa's manicured paradise became a Superfund site. For months, her property was a cacophony of roaring dump trucks, beeping excavators, and shouting workers. The noise and disruption she had inflicted upon the valley during her construction were nothing compared to the invasive, earth-scarring surgery of the cleanup. Her perfect lawn was excavated down to the clay, a vast, muddy pit. Her property, value plummeted. The monument to her arrogance had become a testament to her folly. Jed, meanwhile, continued his life. He received a check from Blackwood, Finch, and Associates that covered all his expenses. He mended his fences, tended his herd, and harvested his hay. The rhythm of his days, the rhythm she had tried so desperately to interrupt, went on, steady and true. He watched the chaos next door not with glee, but with a profound sense of an equilibrium being restored. She had tried to declare war on his way of life, and the land itself had risen up to defend him. He only saw her one more time. It was late in the fall, the air crisp with the promise of winter. The cleanup was mostly done, but her property was a wasteland of upturned dirt waiting for remediation. He was walking the fence line, checking for breaks before the first snow, when he saw her. She was standing near the row of ancient oaks, the property line she had once so contemptuously ignored. The sharp pantsuit and designer sunglasses were gone. She wore simple jeans and a plain jacket, and she looked smaller, diminished. She stared at the ruin of her dream, her face pale and empty. Her eyes lifted and met his across the field. There was no anger left in them, no arrogance. There was only a hollow, desolate emptiness. It was the look of someone who had gambled everything on the belief that the world could be bent to her will, only to have it break her instead. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence said everything. After a long moment, she simply turned and walked back to the cold, empty glass house that sat atop a poisoned patch of earth. Jed finished his walk, his boots firm on the solid ground of his ancestors. He reached the hayfield, the place where it had all started. The grass had grown back thick and green over the tire tracks, nourished by the very substance she had found so vile. He knelt, scooping up a handful of the dark, rich soil. It smelled of life, of history, of resilience. He looked across his 300 acres at the big red barn that was the heart of it all, and the simple farmhouse that was its soul. The peace of the valley, he realized, wasn't a fragile heirloom after all. It was more like the oak trees that marked his land, deeply rooted, patient, and unyielding. It could weather any storm, even one that arrived in a gleaming black SUV. A low moo carried on the wind from the pasture, and for the first time in a long time, Jed felt the quiet settle back into its rightful place, deep in his bones. The natural order was restored.